"They rode away, I trust in heaven, before these dreadful scenes began," said Mr. Haredale, who, between his agitation, his eagerness to mount his horse again, and the dexterity with which the cords were tied, had scarcely yet undone one knot. "A knife, Daisy." "You didn't," said John, looking about as though he had lost his pocket-handkerchief or some such slight article, "either of you gentlemen see a coffin anywheres, did you?" "Willet!" cried Mr. Haredale. Solomon dropped the knife, and instantly becoming limp from head to foot, exclaimed, "Good gracious!" "Because," said John, not at all regarding them, "a dead man called a little time ago on his way yonder. I could have told you what name was on the plate if he had brought his coffin with him and left it behind. If he didn't, it don't signify." His landlord, who had listened to these words with breathless attention, started that moment to his feet, and without a word drew Solomon Daisy to the door, mounted his horse, took him up behind again, and flew rather than galloped towards the pile of ruins, which that day's sun had shone upon, a stately house. Mr. Willet stared after them, listened, looked down upon himself to make quite sure that he was still unbound, and without any manifestation of impatience, disappointment, or surprise, gently relapsed into the condition from which he had so imperfectly recovered. Mr. Haredale tied his horse to the trunk of a tree, and grasping his companion's arm, stole softly along the footpath and into what had been the garden of his house. He stopped for an instant to look upon its smoking walls, and at the stars that shone through roof and floor upon the heap of crumbling ashes. Solomon glanced timidly in his face, but his lips were tightly pressed together, a resolute and stern expression sat upon his brow, and not a tear, a look, or gesture indicating grief escaped him. He drew his sword, felt for a moment in his breast as though he carried other arms about him, then grasping Solomon by the wrist again, went with a cautious step all round the house. He looked into every doorway and gap in the wall, retraced his steps at every rustling of the air among the leaves, and searched in every shadowed nook with outstretched hands. Thus they made the circuit of the building, but they returned to the spot from which they had set out without encountering any human being or finding the least trace of any concealed straggler. After a short pause, Mr. Haredale shouted twice or thrice, then cried aloud, "Is there any one in hiding here who knows my voice? There is nothing to fear now. If any of my people are near, I entreat them to answer." He called them all by name. His voice was echoed in many mournful tones. Then all was silent as before. They were standing near the foot of the turret, where the alarm bell hung. The fire had raged there, and the floors had been sawn and hewn and beaten down besides. It was open to the night, but a part of the staircase still remained, winding upward from a great mound of dust and cinders. Fragments of the jagged and broken steps offered an insecure and giddy footing here and there, and then were lost again behind protruding angles of the wall, or in the deep shadows cast upon it by other portions of the ruin, for by this time the moon had risen and shone brightly. As they stood here, listening to the echoes as they died away, and hoping in vain to hear a voice they knew, some of the ashes in this turret slipped and rolled down. Startled by the least noise in that melancholy place, Solomon looked up in his companion's face and saw that he had turned towards the spot, and that he watched and listened keenly. He covered the little man's mouth with his hand and looked again. Instantly, with kindling eyes, he bade him on his life keep still, and neither speak nor move. Then, holding his breath and stooping down, he stole into the turret with his drawn sword in his hand and disappeared. Terrified to be left there by himself under such desolate circumstances, and after all he had seen and heard that night, Solomon would have followed. But there had been something in Mr. Haredale's manner and his look, the recollection of which held him spellbound. He stood rooted to the spot, and scarcely venturing to breathe, looked up with mingled fear and wonder. Again the ashes slipped and rolled, very, very softly, again and then again, as though they crumbled underneath the tread of a stealthy foot. And now a figure was dimly visible, climbing very softly, and often stopping to look down. Now it pursued its difficult way, and now it was hidden from the view again. It emerged once more into the shadowy and uncertain light, higher now, but not much, for the way was steep and toilsome, and its progress very slow. What phantom of the brain did he pursue, and why did he look down so constantly? He knew he was alone. Surely his mind was not affected by that night's loss and agony. He was not about to throw himself headlong from the summit of the tottering wall. Solomon turned sick and clasped his hands. His limbs trembled beneath him, and a cold sweat broke out upon his pallid face. If he complied with Mr Haredale's last injunction now, it was because he had not the power to speak or move. He strained his gaze and fixed it on a patch of moonlight, into which, if he continued to ascend, he must soon emerge. When he appeared there, he would try to call to him. Again the ashes slipped and crumbled. Some stones rolled down and fell with a dull, heavy sound upon the ground below. He kept his eyes upon the piece of moonlight. The figure was coming on, for its shadow was already thrown upon the wall. Now it appeared, and now looked round at him, and now— The horror-stricken clerk uttered a scream that pierced the air and cried, "The ghost! The ghost!" Long before the echo of his cry had died away, another form rushed out into the light, flung itself upon the foremost one, knelt down upon its breast, and clutched its throat with both hands. "Villain!" cried Mr Haredale in a terrible voice, for it was he. "Dead and buried, as all men supposed, through your infernal arts, but reserved by heaven for this. At last I have you. You, whose hands are red with my brother's blood, and that of his faithful servant, shed to conceal your own atrocious guilt. You, Rudge, double murderer and monster, I arrest you in the name of God, who has delivered you into my hands. No, though you had the strength of 20 men," he added, as the murderer writhed and struggled, "you could not escape me or loosen my grasp tonight." Chapter 56. Read by Deborah Lynn.